You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rosales. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, today we have a guest on the podcast, a mutual friend of ours,
Yes.
Berk Temuroğlu. And Berk lives in Prague, and his professional background has been working for retail and FMCG companies. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term FMCG, it's fast-moving consumer goods. Is that right, Berk?
That is correct, Matt, yes.
Okay. And Berk is currently commercial operations director for a major global company. And when I initially reached out to Berk and asked him what was on his mind, what would he like to talk about on the podcast? What he started talking about was so perfect. It was so right that I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I immediately thought, oh my God, I wish I could just hit record and publish what he's saying right here, right now. So thank you for coming on the podcast, Berk. It's a real pleasure to have you with us.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for the introduction.
And Berk, before we get into today's topic or topics, before I forget, tell our listeners if they want to get in touch with you, where can they email you or how can they find you?
I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so they can get in touch with me very, very easily if they just drop me a note via LinkedIn.
Thanks, Berk. And one of the main topics for today is the problem solution cycle, and more specifically, the importance of the problem solution cycle in making your presentations or communications. Its importance not just in the corporate world and not just for the startup world, but for everybody, regardless of what world you're coming from. So, but before we dive into the problem solution cycle, Berk, you mentioned before the podcast that you had something else on your mind that you wanted to start with. So tell us what's on your mind and just start riffing on that. And then Alper and I will jump in a bit with some questions for you.
Sure. Well, corporate world and the startup world, it's always interesting to talk about these two topics separately and in relation to each other. So today I will try to talk about three topics. I will pick three topics that these two are in common because these are the ones that I encounter more frequently than others, if that's okay with you guys.
Sure, go for it.
That sounds good, yeah.
All right then. Well, as far as the presentations go, key success factors for delivering a successful presentation have started to converge remarkably in the last 5-6 years, especially I think we would all agree during and after COVID. The way how presentations should be executed have gotten to be strikingly similar. But it's also fair at this point that I say that the startup world has already surpassed the corporate world in each dimension or each success factor that I'd like to talk about today. So if we get to the first one, the mindset. Corporate managers, they need to be in a constant pitching mindset. You cannot be sure when and if you will have another chance to pitch or present the same topic, especially to the same group of people. I mean, we all know that executives have super busy calendars and very tight schedules. And startup founders are, let's be frank, they're inherently better coping with this. So corporate managers have to do some catching up here. The good old saying, the quality of a presentation is limited by the attention span of the highest paid person in the room is brutal but necessary reality that corporate managers must accept.
Yeah.
I like that so much. Can we have it one more time on record?
Yeah,
sure.
Say that again.
Yeah, I'll try to say it with the exact same words. The good old saying, the quality of a presentation is limited by the attention span of the highest paid person in the room.
Ooh, nice.
The brutal
like
but
that.
necessary reality.
Yeah.
that
When you
we
take a
all have to
snapshot,
accept.
if you take a snapshot at the presentation moment, there can be so many variables going into that sentence. I really like that.
And Berk,
Yeah,
let's unpack that idea a little bit.
sure.
You mentioned that corporate managers need to adopt some of the mindset of startup founders. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. I mean, there are so
Okay.
many things that we could list here, but
Uh-huh.
this constant pitching mindset, I think, is the starting point. If that's not there, then the rest does not matter, actually.
Tell us a little bit more about that, and specifically, like, what do you see missing in the corporate manager mindset that you wish people would adopt more of?
Uh, the first thing is in the corporate world, of course, we do not really like unknown unknowns.
Mm.
The known unknowns are to a certain degree they're all right, but the
Okay.
unknown unknowns, well, you try to refrain from them. Of course,
Uh,
that's a reality.
okay.
But in the startup world, well, there are so many unknown unknowns for a founder. They somehow build up some sort of a immune to this, and they cope
Mm.
very well in a situation where they don't know exactly whom they are talking to, or they don't even know um, what the other person that they are talking to is actually looking for. So they
Mm.
have
Okay.
the ability to adjust their narrative so fast
Mm. Mm.
and so to the point that I think the corporate managers can learn a lot from.
And one more question, and then I'll throw it over to you, Alper. I don't want to hog all the questions, but Berk, in order to learn this skill, a corporate manager, in adopting this mindset, in learning this skill or adopting this mindset, a corporate manager would need to learn some more skills. Is it going to make it difficult to do the corporate manager's job?
Well, that's a good question, but it's again a little bit dependent on that corporate manager's ability to cope with ambiguity.
Okay.
It's really difficult to say this is the formula to build that stamina or that immune or how
Mm.
to get immune to this managing the ambiguity aspect. But I think it's a little bit about the starting point as well. As a
Okay.
founder, you start from scratch, you start with nothing. You have to build everything from bottom up. So
Sure.
basically, you know for a fact that the rules of the game will not be very individually described, defined,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
you have to find your way around all this ambiguity. So the moment you started with the right mindset, I think whether you're a corporate manager or you're an entrepreneur,
Mm.
it wouldn't matter that much. But you have to be
Okay.
in that mindset. You have to remind yourself this every day in, day out.
Mm. Okay. And Alper, do you have questions for Berk on this topic?
I do, but the questions I had prepared are more about the problem solutions. So if you like, we can come back to them when we move to that part.
Okay, let's talk about the problem solution cycle, because you mentioned also that you had some thoughts on that. Is that correct, Berk?
That is correct, and this is also a big one.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah, tell us more. What did you mean by that?
sure. Actually, it's the substance,
Mm.
meaning what corporate managers, I believe, ought to present when they're presenting is the problem solution fit, meaning the viability of the idea
Mm.
does not count alone. And this problem solution fit in the corporate world is referred to as product market fit. I think that goes without saying.
Okay.
A corporate manager should not be presenting solely an idea, even if it is a good
Mm.
idea, or
Okay.
even if it's a brilliant idea. In
Mm.
the startup scene, this has gotten really better along the years, last 10, 15 years I'm referring to.
Sure.
Maybe 10, 15 years ago, the startup ecosystem was also full of entrepreneurs with a
Mm.
good idea, or we could also say that it was full of entrepreneurs with a solution in their
Okay.
hands, trying to
Ah.
find a problem their
Uh-huh.
products would solve.
Ah,
But
okay.
this has significantly improved. I mean, the entrepreneurs do not make this mistake anymore. However, this
Mm.
still happens to be the case in the majority of the corporate world.
Okay.
Corporate managers still too often do not get the buy-in of executives, not because they fail in describing the solution, but I think they fail either because they completely ignore framing the problem, or
Okay.
they do not frame the problem correctly. That's why their solution, in most cases, does not yield a response that involves a statement like, "All right, yes, let's go, let's do this right away." That's
Do you
how
think
I would
that's
summarize this.
do you think that's the lack of problem in the presentation? Is it because the presenter is not seeing the problem, or is it just because, well, the presenter sees the problem but just isn't spending enough time describing it?
From my experience, of course, it may differ for certain listeners,
Uh,
but from my experience, it's both. I mean, sometimes we tend to fall in love with the idea we have, so we omit the problem. I mean, the idea is
okay.
so brilliant, so interesting, so attractive. We do
Uh,
not feel the need to define the problem first. We
okay.
start from the other way around. Or
Mm,
sometimes I also see that even though the corporate manager has defined the problem, he or she is not able to frame the problem correctly,
mm,
which would
okay.
resonate with the decision
Uh,
makers or with the executives. So I
ah,
think it goes both ways.
okay. And Upper, you mentioned that you had some questions on this topic.
Yeah,
Would you like to take over? What would
yeah.
you like to ask?
Well, Berk, you strike me as a very capable and a big perspective person based on our conversations previously. And now I really enjoyed listening from you the idea of framing the problem. So at this point, I would like to ask you, let's say we're dealing with multiple problems and we have limited amount of time to talk about them or to present them and seek the advice of the people we're speaking to. How how would you prioritize the problems based on their impact and urgency?
Well, there are many different ways to answer this, Alper. But for today, what I could say is, imagine that you're presenting a project, and then you're presenting it to, let's say, a group of audience, which is mainly from the finance background. So let's say you have your finance
Hmm.
manager and your accounting manager and whatnot. You have to frame the problem from a perspective that answers the questions that they might have in their minds when they're listening to you. Whereas if you're presenting to an audience where primarily the audience is composed of human resources or people and culture kind of background, then
Hmm.
you probably need to frame the problem differently. It might still be the same problem, but the way you put
Mm,
it into a perspective, just like a movie director, it needs to be a little bit different. You can't show the same scene from the same angle with the same light from the same perspective. You have to adjust so that the person or persons that are listening to you really captures what the problem that you're trying to solve with the
Hmm.
idea that you're pitching in your presentation.
Okay. Matt, I have a follow up on that.
sure, go for it.
Since we're talking about maybe different audience members and different listening styles in the audience, let's say I have this problem and I'm going to present about it, and there are multiple, there are many moving parts to consider. So how would I balance the need, for example, for a detailed, thorough analysis of the problem, and how would I balance that with the urgency of finding a solution?
Well, urgency is always a difficult to topic. I mean, it's definitely a difficult topic, the urgency part. But chance always favors the prepared mind. I mean, presentation is not only about what you present and how you present, your body language, your tone of voice,
Hmm.
your substance, your subject, etc. You really need to do your homework well before you get on that stage. You really need to know who is in the audience. Sometimes, especially nowadays, after COVID, corporate managers, I'm sure that many of them encounter with this. You find yourself in a situation where there is maybe 20, 30, sometimes even more people who are listening to you. And
Hmm.
guess what? You don't know all of them. I mean, you may
Yeah.
know some of them, but you don't know all of them. So what can you do about it? Well, in best case scenario, before you get to that point of presentation, you do your due diligence and you try to capture as much as you can about the potential audience that might show up that day. I think there is no other way of giving a punchy presentation which would resonate with the audience to the level possible from different sides of the room. I don't see any other way but this.
I understand. And I
Eh,
understand it's important to ensure that the proposed solutions actually will align with the needs, or let's say the goals of the audience.
Correct.
Alpar, I
That
have
is
one
correct.
more. I have a question for Berk on
Sure.
this topic. Do you mind if I jump in?
Sure.
Berk, you mentioned the need to do due diligence and the importance of when you are framing the problem, understanding what audience you are framing the problem for. Is this understanding your audience? Is it something, or framing the problem? Is it something that you can do when you're sitting alone at your kitchen table at night, or do you need to get on the phone or walk into these people's offices and talk to them directly? Is just imagining what does a finance manager care about? Is that something that you can do alone at your kitchen table at night?
Matt, I think you already answered the question yourself, but I'll try to elaborate a little bit. Even though
Sure.
you already did the job. Well, of course, it's definitely the second one. I mean,
Okay.
you really have to understand what the priorities are of the people who will be in the audience. What will
Okay.
they be looking for? What will they be more concerned about, etc., etc. But let's be frank, sometimes you don't have that chance. You cannot, due to time limitations or maybe some other limitations. Maybe you won't have the chance to touch base with every single person in the audience, but you have to do the bare minimum. You
Okay.
have to really do the bare minimum of understanding maybe what the pain points or the consideration points will be or are for a specific number of people who will be in the audience that day.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, Berk, you mentioned that you had something else on your mind that you wanted to talk about today. What was that thing?
Yeah, the third one, the third dimension is actually the return on investment. And this one is actually a little bit tricky. So I hope we're going to be good with regards to time.
Yeah, we'll be fine.
We'll be fine. All right. I mean,
Yeah.
then I will follow up from the second point, and I will try to connect the second dimension with the third one, which is return on investment.
Okay.
Even if the problem and solution fit is carried out correctly, the way we discussed, or if the correct return on investment piece is delivered to the level that it needs to be delivered, there is still something that needs to be kept in mind.
Okay.
And this is not the typical return on investment, meaning purely financial net present value type of calculation.
Sure.
I'm referring to the correct risk to benefit ratio calculation, the ratio of the risk of an action to its potential benefits. I mean,
Sure.
It's very important to note that the resources are always finite, even in the corporate world. So choosing what not to do is always as important as choosing what to do. So when we look at it, we all know that the founding rounds in the startup world, when a startup raises capital, are all labeled. It's seed A, B, C, D, etc.
Sure.
Actually, all these letters associated with the founding rounds, they do not solely denote how many times the startup has raised before. They also signal the degree of risk, right? I mean, it's not only about, all right, this startup is in the B round, so probably they have raised twice before, or I don't know, depending on how many rounds of seed they have raised, etc. But this is not only about that. It definitely signals the degree of risk as well. So if a VC as an example, is investing in the round labeled as, let's say, seed, it implies that the VC that is investing is taking all of the five, I call them the cardinal risks that are associated with venture capital. So what are these? The five cardinal risks. The first one is the risk of the viability of the idea.
Okay.
The second one would be the risk of the problem solution, hence the product market fit risk that we touched base a few minutes ago.
Okay.
The third one would be the risk of perfect execution.
Okay.
The fourth one would be the risk of the stability of the founding team after scaling.
Yeah.
And the last one, the fifth one, would be the risk of correct valuation, which is also very important. But if a VC happens to be investing in the A round, let's say, it means that the VC is actually omitting the first risk, which was at the top of the list that I have just mentioned, which is the risk of the viability of the idea. But in the same time, that same VC also acknowledges or still acknowledges that the other four risks are still in play.
Okay.
So if we take it one step further to maybe to be more clear, a VC investing in the B round means that the VC is omitting the problem solution or the product market risk as well, but it is still keeping the other following three risks in play. So it goes on and like this. That's why the investing at the D and following rounds in the startup world is mostly about the correct valuation risk, because this is the risk which is all the way at the bottom of the list.
So let me see if I understand you correctly so far. So
let's do that.
The point, or one way of looking at the point that you're making, is that as you move on to subsequent funding rounds, Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D, as you move on to subsequent funding rounds, different risks are being taken. Is that what you're saying?
That is actually true, but I wouldn't call them different. It's basically a case that there are always five cardinal risks in play. With every subsequent round, you're dropping one of the risks that was higher in the list.
Okay.
As you move further, like I mentioned, mostly around the D round or E round, sometimes we even hear F rounds, it's all about the valuation risk, because all the other previous four risks, the cardinal ones, probably other VCs or other investors have taken, but they were a part of the seed or A or B or C round. As of D, in most cases, you're just taking the risk of a correct valuation, because all the other elements are probably sorted out. Of course, I'm referring to a scenario where the startup has been successfully scaling, etc., etc.
Yes. And of course, there is a price to pay for having all the other cardinal sins eliminated in the form of having a lower multiplier in your investment.
Absolutely, Alper.
Because the risk I will be taking in Series A or even seed is much bigger, so it has to come with a bigger incentive.
Of course, the payout needs to be bigger. That's for sure.
And Alper, I've got a question for Berk at this point, but I can see from the video that you've got you look like you have a bunch of questions for Berk. So who should go first here?
But I'll save it for another episode, because I have tons more.
Okay, so shall I go with mine?
Go ahead.
Okay, so Berk, you mentioned that as you move on to subsequent rounds, some risks drop out of the picture or become less important. What about and you mentioned that one of the risks was the risk of the founding team. And I know that in some of the later rounds, there might be a completely new management team coming into play where the founding team is dropping out of the picture. So the founding team, which has over time become a known entity, is now leaving the picture and is being replaced by a management team which might be tested elsewhere, but is not tested at this company. So aren't you kind of picking up a new risk in that scenario?
Actually, that is correct. You're definitely picking up an additional risk, but
Okay.
we could also look at it from the other angle.
Mm.
Why is there, or why was there a need for a change in the first place?
Okay.
Meaning, maybe the real risk would be keeping the founding team in place. So it's
Good
not
point.
like they are taking on additional risks.
Oh.
Maybe again, the investors or whoever was the decision maker at this point, the board, etc. Maybe they are actually canceling out an existing risk again.
Okay.
I
So-
also like this saying how a conflict between the founders of a startup is not a question of if, it's a question of when.
That is
and
true, actually.
how
Yes,
the team
Alper.
handles that, how the management handles that, is going to play a crucial role in the future health of the startup.
That is true, Alper. That is definitely true. I would.
Those are not my words; they are actually words of my mentor here.
This is I think that this topic is pretty meaty, and we could easily go for a full episode just on this topic. What do you think, Alper? Should we edit this into a second episode, or what do you think we should do?
I would love to have Berk on the show if he's available another time.
Anytime
That would be fantastic.
Would be my pleasure, definitely.
Okay.
But since you guys have been interested in this topic, actually, what I would like to also mention is when you look at the corporate world from this angle, when a corporate manager goes into a meeting room to pitch an idea, to pitch a project, they have a mandate of showing clearly to the board or the decision makers which of these 5 fundamental risks are in play with regards to the funds that are being asked as well. But unfortunately, in the corporate world, at least 3 of these rounds are skipped by connecting the first one to the 5th one, meaning by connecting the viability of the idea risk, so the first one in the list, and the valuation risk, which is the last one in the list. Because we tend to look at only the expected ROI right away. So no problem solution or product market fit risk assessment, no perfect execution risk assessment, and even no team dynamics risk assessment either in most cases.
That's a very interesting point. Do you think, Berk, it could be related to the fact that in the corporate world, the executive making the final decision doesn't have skin in the game, I will say, in the shape of losing his or her own money? Because in the investor world, that's definitely the case.
Alper, this is a difficult question because it's very true that the corporate manager is not losing, let's say, money. That's I think, a fair statement. But there is also a lot that the corporate manager is also risking, or he or she could lose as well.
Sure.
It's a long marathon, the corporate world. So you really definitely would like to be regarded as an expert in your area, in the line of work you do. But unfortunately, I think the core issue, the underlying issue why this is happening is a little bit, again, we are so strapped in terms of time and available attention that we can show to multiple things at the same time. I think we are skipping steps because we are rushing a little bit, because everything is faster. Everything is faster and faster as years progress. So I think this is the real issue around the topic.
Yeah, and even beyond monetary loss, your reputation could be hanging on the line, and enough wrong decisions, and after that, no amount of money would be able to get back that reputation in place.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
Berk, it sounds like you are suggesting that corporate managers could learn a lot from the presentation skills of startup founders, and vice versa. Startup founders could learn a lot from corporate managers. On the corporate side, first of all, before I ask my question, is that a correct summary of what you have just said?
It is definitely a correct summary.
Okay.
But if I could make a contribution to what you just said,
Sure, go for it.
I think in the past meaning, again, let's stick to the last 10, 15 years time span, there was a lot that the startup founders could learn from corporate managers.
Okay.
But now it's tilting towards the other side. So in the last 4 or 5 years or so, I think there are many things that the corporate managers could learn from the startup founders. But it's still the same. It's still the same. There are so many that these two groups of people can learn from each other. It still exists.
And in your opinion, why a corporate manager? Why is if a corporate manager could learn from the framing and presentation and communication skills of a startup founder, why is the corporate manager, or why are many corporate managers not doing that? Why are they not spending a lot of time in this world and seeing how other people do it?
There could be different reasons for each and every individual. First, maybe they don't have the chance to do this. I mean, maybe they are not given the chance to do this for multiple reasons. It's difficult to know. Or the second one could be that the corporate manager is not actually inclined or interested in the startup world. Not everybody loves talking about topics with a lot of unknowns. And not everybody is comfortable around that. Or it could be the fact that they don't have access to these startup founders, because guess what? The startup founders are also they're short in terms of available time to spend with corporate managers. So there could be multiple reasons, but I think the job of the corporate manager is to crack this, to find a way to get as close as possible, whatever that closeness might mean, to the startup founder, so he or she can get the most out of it.
Okay.
In this regard, I think the corporate ventures are the perfect opportunities for bringing the best of two worlds together and learn from each other.
That is actually correct. I think this is one of the reasons. I'm sure that it is not the reason, but one of the reasons why we are seeing more and more entrepreneurship programs within big corporations, because this is what puts you in a place where you can understand how the business is conducted, not only the presentations, but the business is conducted when the resources are as finite as it can be.
Yeah.
And Alper, I would like to go on peppering Berk with questions all day long, but we do need to wrap this up. So before we wrap it up, do you have any more questions for Berk?
No, but I will definitely ask for his appearance one more time, depending on his schedule. That would be fantastic.
Berk, it's been a real pleasure having you with us today, and we definitely hope to have you back. We have a million more questions for you.
The pleasure is really all mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
I would love to join once again whenever you guys are available.
Excellent. Good to hear. So, Alper, let's wrap it up, and let's see. I guess I'll see you next week then.
We'll talk next week. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Alper. Talk to you later.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rosanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.